Now, I've done a lot of these political quizzes, and I've complained how biased most of them are. They want you to turn out to be part of their club, whatever that club happens to be. They don't actually give you a fair set of answers that gives you an honest conclusion. And nowhere is that more true than this test called Are You a Liberal?, where the creators are just going to tell you that you're a liberal, whether you're a liberal or not. It's really absurd how slanted this one is. So let's get started. Housing is a universal human need. How should it be met? First off, I'm going to quibble on how the question is phrased. Housing is a universal human responsibility. It's your job to provide housing and food and all the rest for yourself and your family. It's not society's job to come along and do it for you. Now, reading through these options, none of them are really very good. Public housing and subsidies? No, absolutely not. It's your job, not the taxpayers. Now, there's two of these I might be able to go for. The second, that eliminates subsidies in public housing, although I think it's an incomplete option. And the third, that provides government-backed mortgage companies that help people buy homes on their own. Of course, you can only do that if you put people who actually qualify for these mortgage programs into them. Otherwise, you just get a replay of the 2008 financial crisis. So I guess I'll go for number 3 because it's closer to the truth, but it's not all the way there. And I can only pick the answers they provide, so unfortunately, that's going to be number 3. Religious values reach to the core of human identity, philosophy, and ethics. A healthy social order needs the following policy. Now, my position is that religion and government need to be completely separate. Government can't work against religious belief, but neither can it take anything that the religious believes seriously. Government needs to be completely secular. And that means that some of these, like number 3, are right out. Number 4 is the one I have to go with, but I can already see how it's going to be problematic. Lots of these quizzes assume that if you're not religious, you're liberal. So saying the government has nothing to do with religion is going to push you right into the liberal box. And that's a problem with a lot of these questionnaires that someone like me has to be aware of. Being non-religious does not mean being liberal. But I'll go with number 4. Because of legal restrictions, teens can't do paid work until the age of 16. What is the right policy? Well, in most places, kids can't work until they're 18, not by law, but because the laws have made it so inconvenient for employers that they simply won't hire anyone before they're 18. So I'll give you my views. I think that employment for everyone starting around 16 is not only valuable, but very important. And I think that we need to encourage kids to develop a strong work ethic as early as possible. That doesn't mean putting them in the coal mines, but they need to start learning the value of money and the importance of hard work as soon as they can. Now, I myself started cutting lawns when I was maybe 12 or 13, and by the time I was 16, I was working part-time at a regular company, so that by the time I was 18, my employer was desperate to move me into management and a full-time position. So I worked all the way through college, and I paid my own way out of my own pocket. And I think that's really valuable. I think that's the way people should do things. And again, I don't buy their wording. Work isn't a human right. It's a human responsibility. Nobody has to provide a job for you. You need to get off your ass and find a way to be gainfully employed, period. So I'm going to go with number 4, even with the bad wording. Business cycles we expect, but full-blown financial crises are different. We should entirely ignore number 4. Not just no, but hell no. Fuck you liberals. But the problem is, all the others have some elements that I might agree with in aggregate. I do believe in a free market, but a totally free market becomes corrupted over time. We do need a certain degree of government regulation to keep the corruption at bay, so long as the government regulation is not likewise corrupt. So as long as the marketplace is regulated well, we'll never need a bailout because we won't get into these problems in the first place. In fact, I think corrupt institutions deserve to go out of business, allowing better businesses to arise in their place. So I'm going to go with number 2, although it's not the whole story. Minorities in any unpopular group are treated with bias and possibly disadvantaged, which is why I completely disagree with the premise. I don't think that minorities are necessarily treated with bias or disadvantaged automatically, and that's why I reject 1 out of hand, and I think number 4 is just stupid. And while I think number 3 has some truth to it, number 2 is probably where it's at. People should have the opportunity to improve their lives, which everyone does. It might not result in the same outcome, and that depends on how hard you work and a lot of other factors that are sometimes beyond your control, but so long as you can make your life better, that's all society needs to provide you. It's up to you to take that opportunity and do something with it. Some say that the rich are getting richer and the poor seem stuck. How should tax policy adapt? Well, it shouldn't. There should be no income caps and no wealth redistribution. Everyone should be free to make as much money as they can, so long as they don't stop others from being free to do the same. And that's the thing about wealth. Just because someone else has it doesn't mean you can't. The reality is, there isn't any equality. I will never be as rich as Bill Gates, and I don't care, because I know that's an unrealistic expectation. This is more liberal equality of outcome nonsense. Nobody owes you the same outcome. Are the rich going to have more influence? Of course they are, and they've earned it through their success. So number 2 is what I'm going with. We need more money in the hands of the people and less in the hands of the government. A brutal dictator has taken control of a Latin American country, oppressing his people. Neighboring nations are calling for help. Your country's response? Well, it honestly depends on how that dictator's regime affects us. Now, I don't want to sound heartless, but isn't it the responsibility, at least for the most part, for downtrodden people to rise up and overthrow their oppressors? I mean, isn't that how America did it? I mean, yeah, we had help from France and Spain, but most of the people on those battlefields were Americans fighting for their own freedom. It just seems like today, there's a lot of people who, when they get into trouble, they run away and they expect other nations to take them in and take care of them. When did that become our job again? Therefore, I don't think any of these really apply. I mean, we can provide humanitarian aid to those in need, but what happens in other countries, so long as it doesn't directly affect us, isn't really our job. Sticking our nose into other people's business has gotten us into a ton of trouble in the past. We need to learn from our mistakes. I mean, I guess we can criticize it and speak out against abuses, which means the first option is what I have to go with, but I don't agree that war is only defensive. And if that dictatorship gets in the way of our legitimate interests, I've got no problem blowing them back to the Stone Age. But this question doesn't say that's the case. So, reluctantly, I'm going to vote number 1, even though I'm sure it will count me as a liberal because I'm not a hardcore military hawk. Immigrants from abroad are attracted to your country's high wages and job opportunities, but residents are pushing back. Your country's response? First off, what the heck is up with that picture? What does it have to do with immigrants? Are they just trying to avoid showing non-white people in conjunction with immigration? I wouldn't be surprised. Regardless, though, immigration is for the good of the country, not for the good of the immigrants. And I don't care how much you want to come here. We've got no responsibility whatsoever to take you in unless you're going to benefit us. Therefore, I really don't like any of the options available. Some have some decent parts, like number 4, that says we need to have a common culture, and that's fine, we do. But that doesn't mean we need to keep everyone else out. It means we only allow people in that are going to integrate with our current culture and not be eternal outsiders living within our nation. And likewise, number 2 says we should strongly vet anyone coming into the country and exclude criminals, which I agree with. But that doesn't mean we should just open the door to anybody else who wants to come. So I guess I'm going to have to go with number 3 that says that only highly educated people get to come. Although I think we can allow in people who have the skills we need, even if they're not educational skills, and anyone else, no matter how much they want to be here, don't have to be permitted. Immigration is our choice, not the choice of the immigrant. Economists have discovered that your country has a huge trade deficit with several countries in the developing world which themselves have import restrictions. Your country's response? Well, it depends on why it's happening, which of course they don't go into. And again, I think we need to do what's best for us, whatever that happens to be. And the same goes for other countries. They need to do what's best for their citizens. And sometimes those two options don't coincide. What's best for their people may not be what's best for our people, and vice versa. So because we have no control over what they do, nor should we can only respond to the situation at hand and make the choices best for our country, regardless of what they're doing. All we can do is make our decisions and let their decisions stand. It doesn't necessarily hurt them or help them, and it isn't any of our business regardless. So I'm going to go with number 3, even though I don't agree with the entire premise. Image not found. Okay, anyway, many young people are using marijuana despite laws against it. Your country's response. I love saying that. First off, I don't care what people do. I care about the legality of it. Many people murder too, and that doesn't mean we should stop making it illegal. I'm a huge opponent of drug use. I think that people who use illicit drugs are losers, and frankly, I've got no sympathy for them. But that's neither here nor there. See, my position is that anyone who feels the need to inject, ingest, snort, or smoke some illicit substance to make themselves feel better is a complete pathetic loser. And that includes things like alcohol and tobacco. Instead of hating reality and wanting to alter your moods, why don't you just grow the hell up and deal with the real world, whether you like it or not? Stop being a child. I really don't like any of these because I think the real solution isn't necessarily criminalization, but social change. I think we need to get to the point where people are responsible and say, well, that's just stupid. And I know that's not likely to happen anytime soon. I just don't think that saying, it's okay, is okay, because it's not okay. If you don't like your lot in life, change things. Don't just stick a needle in your arm so you can forget about it for a while. That's stupid, because when you come back down, your problems are still there. That said, I disagree with all of them. I don't think we should be putting drug users in prison. I think we should be getting them the hell off drugs. We shouldn't be telling them we're going to be punishing them for doing it. We should be telling them they're morons for doing it in the first place. I don't know that drugs are gateways to anything. I think that they're a symptom of a damaged individual. And the only way to get the damaged individual to stop acting in a damaged way is to stop them from being damaged. Going after the producers, which I guess isn't a bad idea, doesn't stop the damage from existing. People will just go to sniffing glue or huffing paint cans to get high. So I'm going to go with the least liberal option I can, just to offset some of the other questions, I guess. Governments in most times and places have reserved the power to take private property for public use, that is, eminent domain. What's your view of this? I'm not a particular fan of eminent domain, although there are some times when it has to be used. It must always serve the community, not private interests. It must be for the good of the people, not for the good of the government or private businesses. Now, I do agree entirely with number 4. The private property cannot be taken without adequate compensation. You can't have the government stealing from the people. But there are times when it's a legitimate good that must occur for the good of the community. If you have to widen a freeway or you have to improve roads or infrastructure and there's no other way to do it, go ahead and do it. Pay the people inconvenienced and make life better for everyone. I'm going with number 2. How would you characterize the role of labor unions in society? I hate unions. I hate them. I especially hate public sector unions, and I would love to see them completely outlawed. Now, there's 2 options here that I'm struggling between. Number 1, which says that people can join unions if they want, but businesses cannot be forced to hire people in a union, which I do completely agree with. And number 4, which says that unions are destructive and we need to protect businesses from them. And I agree with both of these. People ought to be able to join whatever they want to join and associate with whoever they want to associate with. But I'd rather see these things be more like trade associations, which may help workers in their problems while leaving them as individuals. What I don't want to see are the monstrosities that we've seen modern unions turn into. It's a bunch of collectivist nonsense that makes individuals into little more than cogs in the machine that now have no more choice than businesses do. They have to go along with the union's decisions, whether they like it or not. And we do need to protect businesses from these predatory unions. Unions once served a purpose, but today they're extremely harmful, not just to businesses, but to individual employees as well. Still, I think I'm going to go with number 1 because I think people ought to be able to join whatever they want to join, and I think businesses ought to be able to tell unions to go take a hike. I honestly don't get this one at all. It says, all businesses advertise, which is a form of speech. How do free speech rights apply? How do they apply to what? So long as a business isn't making fraudulent statements, they can say anything they want, just like anyone else can. The government can't tell a business what they can and can't say about their own products, again, so long as they aren't being dishonest. There's no difference between commercial speech and free speech. It's all identical. So why is this a question at all? The government can no more control what you say, except in cases of slander or treason and the like, than they can tell McDonald's what they can say in their TV commercials, outside of FCC regulations on profanity and the like. So why is this a question? I guess I'm going to go with number 2. People have no responsibility to listen to speech they don't want to hear, and the government has no place telling a business how it can advertise its products. This is just dumb. CEOs today bring in huge salaries and bonuses. What's your opinion? Here's my opinion. Who the hell cares? It's none of my business what any company out there wants to pay their CEO or any member of their staff. If they want to pay someone $1 billion a year, go right ahead. It's not my concern, unless I'm on their board of directors or a shareholder, at which point I have a say. But the general public doesn't, and the government doesn't, and they need to stay the hell out of it. They've got no business making laws telling private companies what they can and cannot do with their salaries. This is just absurd. So, number 2, and liberals can go screw themselves. What is the right relationship between the state and education? Well, it's the same as between the state and everything else. The government is the legislative arm of society. It is put in place to ensure the will of the people is done. That said, I do think we need a lot more control over education, not less. Now let me explain. I think that education is essential to the well-being of any modern society. Society needs people who are intelligent, educated, and rational. And there's a lot of powers out there who want none of that. That includes religion and political interests who want people to be stupid and gullible. And I want to end that reign of terror once and for all. Therefore, I think we need to set national minimum standards for education. All schools, public, private, and home, must teach at least these standards to be considered education at all. There are no exceptions. And I don't care what crazy nonsense you believe, you are going to teach them, period. If you want to teach other crazy stuff, I can't stop you. But your kids will be tested on this knowledge, and they damn well better know it, or they're going to fail. So again, I disagree with every single one of these options. I'd be on board for number 4, except for the free college, which I strongly oppose. So reluctantly, I'm going to go with number 2, even though I think that the damage has already largely been done, and we need to stomp it out. And this is another question that has no good answers. Where do you stand on the great minimum wage controversies of our time? I think liberals are idiots. I think that the idea that a minimum wage ought to be a living wage is stupid. Now, I don't oppose a minimum wage, but I think that it ought to be for those just starting out, for kids living with their parents, just learning job skills. If you're an adult with a family and you've never earned more than minimum wage, you are a moron. So as usual, none of the above. Probably the best option is number 1. I think the minimum wage should be tied to inflation, but I don't really think it's that low. I think people ought to stop having minimum wage jobs if they've ever had a job in their life. You should never have one after the first year at your first job. Get that first raise for merit and don't ever look back. Since early in the 20th century, governments have intervened in hopes of guaranteeing food quality, product safety, and drug effectiveness. Is this a necessary and good policy? Yes. Yes, it is. I think we need to have an independent group that regulates the food and drug industry and keeps them honest. If they say something's safe, it needs to be safe. If they say something works, it needs to work. In fact, I think we need to get rid of the whole food additive nonsense that allows shysters to make absurd claims about products that don't fall under the FDA. If you can't prove it works in a lab, you can't advertise that it does. We need less woo-woo promoters, not more. So this is another difficult one because it doesn't give a good response. Number 4 says regulation can go too far, which is true, but I'm not at all comfortable with being accountable to public agencies. I don't like how it's worded. Number 3 is just conspiracy theorist nonsense. Businesses are not automatically out to get you. Number 2 says the system is too expensive, but I think the reason that it needs reform is because it doesn't go far enough to regulate some things. I'm sure it costs way too much now. Virtually all government programs do, but we really do need more control over bad ideas. So, I don't know. I guess number 2. Vaping has emerged as an alternative to smoking cigarettes, and people say it's much safer. What should be done? Well, as far as I'm concerned, vaping is no different than any other drug, and we should work to eliminate it because people who engage in it are pathetic losers. I'm just going with number 4. We need oversight and testing to see if it's actually hazardous, and then it needs to be handled appropriately. What is the proper role of government in healthcare? Other than keeping it honest, it shouldn't have one. We shouldn't have any government-supplied healthcare whatsoever. It's a commodity, just like food. You shouldn't have the government telling you what to eat or breaking into your house to make sure you're eating enough fruits or vegetables either. In fact, government intervention has caused a lot more trouble in the healthcare industry than it's fixed. Newsflash for liberals, healthcare is not a right. It doesn't appear in the Constitution. So stop pretending that you can mandate it for everyone or force people to do what you want them to do. Number 1 wins. When a hurricane, flood, tornado, or other natural disaster happens, people believe that government should act. What do you think? I think people need to be responsible for their own lives, period. Alright, the government can come by and provide food and water to the people while the system gets fixed. I mean, I've got no problem with FEMA coming around with emergency medical teams to help while local services are overwhelmed. But the number of people who think that the government needs to provide all is ridiculous. It's your job to provide for yourself and your family. It's your job to have the proper insurance to rebuild after a disaster. I mean, it's not like you can live in Florida and go, I had no idea they had hurricanes, or live in California and pretend you didn't know about earthquakes. If you're that dumb, you deserve to die. It isn't government's job to come by and hold your hand and coddle you. So, no surprise, there are really no good answers here. I'd go with number 3, except it says that government should stay away, which, as I already said, isn't necessarily the case. Government can fill in the gaps while private industry and charity get set up and running. People need to start looking at themselves, not at the government, for their own salvation. So I guess I'll go with number 2, which isn't perfect, but I guess it's the best I'm gonna get. And of course, as should be no surprise, this survey thinks I'm a complete liberal. And then it sings the praises of liberalism over and over and over again. Of course, nothing I said, no response I gave, came from liberalism. In fact, this is another survey where the possible responses were cooked so that you couldn't get any other option. In fact, I've gone back and checked other options, including the hardcore far-right ideas that they allow, and I still get totally liberal. If someone manages to get any other option, let me know in the comments, because I don't think it's possible. And if you read the comments, pretty much nobody else does either. This is a total liberal sham, which should surprise no one. And I get that they're using liberal totally differently than most people do today. Classical liberalism has nothing at all to do with the kind of regressive stupidity that we see today. But still, they're not using the word in a way most people understand it in the modern world. They're denying that conservatism even exists because, so far as I can tell, you just can't get that as a conclusion. This whole thing is just stupid. It's exactly why I complain so much about these ludicrously biased tests that exist only to tell you that you're something that you're not. It shouldn't be asking if you're a liberal. They should just say they're going to make you a liberal whether you like it or not. And this is probably the most ridiculously biased test I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them. So what do you think? Go ahead and take the test, and don't be surprised if they tell you that you're a liberal, because as far as I can tell, everybody is. Have you ever seen anything worse than this? I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments.
Everything changes.